Welcome back to One Piece Explained. Chapter 1095 dropped, and it is actually insane. I feel like I've said this for every chapter breakdown in the past few months, but that's truly because the Egghead arc has been one of, if not the greatest arc in the series of all time. Every chapter has some crazy action or some huge reveals and plot developments. It's incredible. And this chapter is of course no different, with what looks to be the start of the Kuma flashback. Now we've waited over a decade for this and it's finally here. Before we get into the breakdown, if you've been enjoying my videos over the past few weeks, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed and liked the video to help the channel grow. I can't thank you all enough for the support you've shown the channel. Truly, thank you. And with that said, let's get into the breakdown for chapter 1095, Better Off Dead in This World. The chapter picks back up right where the last one left off, with Bonney having just stabbed Saturn and drawing blood. Of course, this effort is all in vain as Saturn simply pushes her back and his injury disappears. Now there are a few possibilities for this. This could just be an explicit ability of Saturn's Devil Fruit, which we don't have the name or model for just yet, and as I discussed in my 1094 breakdown, Saturn's powers look to be inspired by the Ushi Oni or Gyuki, a monstrous yokai from Japanese folklore. This could also just be attributed to the inherent resilience and recovery of awakened Zoans that we first learned of back during the Impel Down arc from Crocodile. But there's also a chance that this could have something to do with the Five Elders' suspected immortality. Fans have long speculated that the Five Elders do not age, as their appearance across the decades has stayed the same. This was first suggested during the Ohara flashback, which took place 22 years ago, with their silhouettes resembling their modern-day appearance. It was teased once again in the German 66 cover story when Vegapunk came before the Elders, which likely took place years before the Ohara incident. And we get another piece of evidence later on in this very chapter, during the flashback to 38 years ago, with a glimpse of Saturn looking very much like he does today. But this is all still a working theory, and we'll have to wait and see. When Bonney gets pushed back, Saturn's eyes glow similarly to how they did in the previous chapter, when he seemingly blew up or knocked back the head of a Marine. And when Sanji tries to save Bonney, he also gets forced back head first and coughs up blood. And a bit later in the chapter, he along with the Vegapunks and Frankie are unable to move their bodies due to some mysterious force that Vegapunk attributes to a devil fruit. Given the current context, this likely is some specific power of Saturn's Devil Fruit at play, and we don't really have a proper understanding of how this works exactly, as he was able to seemingly decapitate a Marine soldier, but is only able to do damage to and restrain our heroes. Of course, this can be attributed to plot armor, but it is interesting to me that he didn't simply just take out Vegapunk or even try to damage Frankie with his power when he was saving Luffy. Perhaps there's some limitation to it, with Sanji and Bonney being strong enough individuals to withstand the implosion of their heads, and maybe it doesn't work on cybernetically augmented individuals such as Frankie and Atlas with their cyborg bodies, and Vegapunk with his head being replaced with an antenna. Oh, also, I love that Frankie's just laughing in the face of one of the highest authorities in the world like this. It reminds me a lot of his demeanor in the face of an emperor back during Wano. We also learned some more about the various Vice Admirals that we saw in that lineup in chapter 1089. Now back in my breakdown for that chapter, I had speculated that this bulkier Vice Admiral may actually be one of the members of the Giant Squad that we saw during the Marineford arc. But with this chapter, we see him standing next to Vice Admiral Doberman, who is only slightly smaller than him, suggesting to me that this is actually a new character altogether. Now on the other side of Doberman is the Vice Admiral with some sort of rounded blade atop his head, which he fixes his hands on when Doberman calls the Marines to take action. It'll be interesting to see if this is some sort of projectile blade that he can shoot off of his head. On the topic of weird headpieces though, we also see the Vice Admiral that resembles a fishman later on in this chapter taking aim at Bonney. Though not with a gun, but the top of his hat, which looks to have actually grown taller and formed the barrel of a cannon or gun. This, of course, reminds me a lot of Frankie's hairstyle during the Dressrosa arc when he formed a cannon with his hair, but this one seems to be fully operational. Actually, there's a possibility that this hat has been growing over the course of the arc, as when we first see him in 1089, the hat is fairly small, but in 1094, it seems to be a little bit taller, and now it looks to be a proper top hat. I'm curious what this actually is, if it's the hat itself or some sort of devil fruit that allows his head or hair to grow as well. We'll have to see, but Oda seems to be having a lot of fun with these Vice Admirals in this arc. We learned that the special people Bonney had said Kuma was from were actually the Buccaneer, and from this chapter, it seems that the Buccaneer were people who have the blood of giants. And these people at one point in time went against the world government and ended up extinct, aside from Kuma, of course. Now there's a ton to unpack here, so let's just get right into it. First and foremost, the situation with the Buccaneers sounds a lot like that of the Lunarians, a group of people that were on the wrong side of the government and ended up practically extinct because of it. And the way this is framed, it may be possible that the Buccaneers also held the will of D, but we'll have to see. Furthermore, they seem to be related to giants through blood. Well, what does that mean exactly? Earlier in this arc, Bonney noted that Vegapunk was interested in Kuma's muscle and latent abilities, and we see this incredible strength on display when Kuma was younger than 10 years old in this chapter. And we've seen just how big and tall Kuma is as an adult, over 20 feet or 6 meters in height, placing him around the size of people like Gecko Moria, Kaido, and Whitebeard. And for context, Big Mom is currently the tallest known human, coming in at around 28 feet tall. Now, in my video going over the evidence for how old Bonney and Egghead could be, which if you haven't checked out yet, I recommend it. There's some fun exploration of the timelines going on there. We calculated the average height of a regular giant to be around 18 meters or 62 feet tall. So Kuma is roughly 1/3 of a giant's height. Okay, we get it. Kuma's abnormally big, but so are most One Piece characters. And that's true too, but I think the presence of such large people in this world has made it seem like Kuma's size wasn't an outlier in the series, when in actuality, not many characters are over 20 feet tall to begin with. And with that said, it seems like having the blood of giants contributes to the Buccaneers being very large people. Now, could this mean that Buccaneers are humans who are part giant? We've seen various races in the One Piece world are able to procreate with humans, as evidenced by the existence of the Charlotte family. However, we've yet to see half-human, half-giant hybrids. In fact, the only half-giant hybrid we've seen in this series are the Wotans, the only one of which was introduced during the Long Ring Longland arc. As we know, giants are held in very high regard in the world of One Piece, with Elbaf being touted as the strongest nation in the world, and there have been centuries of effort put towards gigantification with humans in order to recreate that kind of military might. It wasn't until relatively recently, within the past century or so, that giants and humans started diplomatic relations, with Mother Carmel's efforts producing the first giant marine soldier with John Giant, which paved the way for more giants to join their cause, as we saw during the Marineford War with the Giant Squad. Now, for whatever reason, it seems the world government antagonized the Buccaneers in the past to the point where they became nearly extinct, leaving the world with no humans that had giant blood, and in turn, losing their best opportunity to match the might of natural giants. As such, they were forced to research artificial means of gigantification, which never really panned out, as we saw with the numbers who were an unsuccessful attempt at recreating ancient giants, as well as the fruitless efforts of Caesar Clown on Punk Hazard more recently. In the last half-century, the world government came across a surviving family that carried Buccaneer blood, Clap and his son Kuma. And after the two were enslaved, Clap was killed, but Kuma was allowed to live on, and eventually was somehow allowed the position of king of his home country of Sorbet, and then later on appointed as a warlord of the sea in exchange for his cooperation in the government's latest militaristic efforts, the Pacifista Project. With this, the world government was able to acquire an army of cyborg clones of the sole surviving member of the Buccaneer people, Bartholomew Kuma. When you put all of this into perspective like this, with the world government's efforts to acquire the might of the giants across all of these centuries, it's actually incredible. Oda has been building up to this big revelation this whole time. Now, speaking of wanting militaristic power, Big Mom has also been after the might of the giants, initially hoping to facilitate it through the marriage of her daughter Lola and the Crown Prince of Elbaf, Loki. However, when these negotiations fell through, she had to look towards science and entrusted Caesar with the task. Now, Big Mom has also said that there were 3 races she was missing in Totoland, one of which being the Giants and the other being the Lunarians. Could the third race actually be the Buccaneers? Big Mom had said one of the races was lost to time, which would make sense from her perspective, as she doesn't have much reason to know that Kuma is a Buccaneer, especially if it was being kept secret. I'll note that we haven't actually seen any of the sky races in her country either, but that's a whole different story. One last bit regarding the Buccaneers is the paw symbol that is associated with Kuma. I wonder if this symbol is actually a symbol of the Buccaneer people. Now, I know the first inclination is to say that this is just inspired by his abilities, the paw fruit. However, it should be noted that Kuma's paw palms feature 4 circles between the fingers, whereas Kuma's symbol only has 3. Furthermore, all of Kuma's techniques are in the shape of his 4-circle paw. Now, I've talked about this on the channel before, but the reason this interests me is because during Jinbei's cover story, we come across the ruins of an ancient civilization that bears the same symbol as Kuma. Not only that, a poneglyph is located in these ruins as well, contributing to the greater relevance of this civilization in the grand scheme of things, especially considering what we know now. Could these be the ruins of the Buccaneer people of ancient times? Sort of related to this, I also think it's incredibly interesting that S-Bear is given the same paw symbol clothing as an adult, while the rest of the Seraphim are dressed like how they were dressed when depicted by Oda in the SBS. There may be something here. So a week or two ago, I put out a video going over the various timelines and pieces of evidence that could give us a better idea at what Bonney's true age actually could be. And I talked about it earlier, but really, if you haven't checked it out yet, it's worth a watch. If not for the age speculation, then for the timelines of various characters being put together. However, with this chapter, we are given a new piece of information, one that could single-handedly shut down the entire age discussion. If Bonney is truly Kuma's daughter, then she is a quarter Buccaneer. Well, why does that matter? This whole time, we've been approaching it from the perspective of how humans age, when in fact, giants age at a completely different rate than humans. The oldest giant we've seen so far are Yarul and Yorul from Big Mom's flashback to Elbaf, who are over 3 centuries old, and in that flashback, we see a young Hyruden, who looks to still be a child. However, given that this flashback takes place 63 years ago, and Hyruden is 81 in present day, then he's actually 18 years old here. But if you look at Oda's depiction of the Grand Fleet captains as children from Volume 82, then you'll see that his appearance is relatively the same, perhaps being depicted a tiny bit shorter due to how compact the page is. But still, there isn't much difference. So despite being 18 years old, he's still referred to and seen as a child. And this makes sense, since giants have much longer lifespans, so their childhood years would be much longer than that of a normal humans. So this logic could also apply to Bonney, who could have giant blood herself. Being 3/4 human, Bonney may physically age at a rate closer to that of the average human. However, that quarter Buccaneer or giant blood may mean that she has a much longer lifespan than the average human. In essence, making her still a child in giant years. Oh man, if this is what's actually going on, then absolutely incredible work here by Oda. The alternative of her actually being a child would be incredibly disappointing and gross, so to be able to craft this mystery around the idea of her being part giant would be much more satisfying and surprising, as it means she's not an actual child by any means. But of course, we'll have to see how it actually plays out. Though this does remind me a little bit of Kureha, who is also well over 100 years old in present day. Now, could the secret to her youthful appearance actually be giant's blood as well? That's a whole different video, but at the very least, it's fun to think about for now. As Bonney is surrounded by Marines taking aim, she recalls memories of Kuma telling her about Nika, the warrior of liberation, and this transitions us into the long-awaited flashback of Bartholomew Kuma. Bonney, having been aware of the stories of Nika this whole time, is a bit of fun irony, as at the start of the arc, she mentions having seen Luffy in his all-white appearance, but not understanding that this was the recent coming of Nika she had heard so much about. While still enslaved to the Celestial Dragons, Clapp instills the stories of Nika in a young Kuma, and we first heard of the mythology of Nika from Who's Who during Wano, and he explained that it was a story told by slaves throughout the years, but here we learned that it was also part of Buccaneer culture as well. Now this makes things a little more interesting, perhaps even adding to the long-held speculation that Nika or Joy Boy were giants themselves. The giant race seemingly has a lot of connection to the history of the One Piece world. For one, the giants have incredibly long lifespans as previously discussed, allowing them to be natural holders of truths and histories. We've actually seen their affinity for such knowledge in this arc during Vegapunk's flashback to the aftermath of Ohara, where we see a group of giants consisting of Hyruden, Gerd, and Goldberg salvaging the remains of the library of Ohara. And also of note, we've seen the giants of Elbaf being swayed by Carmel's invoking of the sun god a few times during Big Mom's flashback. The sun and the sun god are a big part of their culture as well, as evidenced by the Winter Solstice Festival. Now there have been a few other tangential hints that Joy Boy or Nika were giants, a big one being the giant straw hat that Emu keeps frozen in the basement of Mary Joa. But there's also the Iron Giant that was constructed 900 years ago during the Void Century, and interestingly, its design shares a lot of similarities with the traditional Norse Viking garments, the culture that Elbaf is inspired from. But it also bears resemblance to the ancient giants with these horns. Now it doesn't seem unreasonable that giants would create a giant robot in their own image. Taking this a step further, could the ancient kingdom in fact be a kingdom of giants, perhaps even ancient giants? After all, the researchers of Ohara landed on the existence of a kingdom that is described as immense or enormous on several occasions, and for years we as readers have taken this as a measure of the kingdom's success or prosperity, but perhaps this was a literal description of the kingdom's size. There is a lot going on here, and so many things point to the importance of giants in the world of One Piece. I, for one, cannot wait until we get to Elbaf, but we've gotten so far into this video, and we still haven't even talked about God Valley, so let's get into that. We cut over to God Valley 38 years ago. Now this number should jump out at you as this is of course the same year of the God Valley incident, which I doubt we'll see in full during this flashback, but the fact that Kuma was part of it in some capacity is purely mind-boggling. Also of note, this is taking place in the West Blue. This is actually pretty significant. Due to the importance of the God Valley incident, we were led to believe that it took place on the Grand Line, where most notable events in the series take place. However, this would have created an inconsistency in the series. You see, in Film Red and Volume 4 Billion, the accompanying data book for that movie with some of Oda's canonical inclusions, we learned that Shanks was found in a treasure chest at God Valley by Roger, Rayleigh, and Scopper Gaban. Oda included a sketch of the three finding a young Shanks as well, so this is canonical to the series. We also learned that Shanks belongs to the Figarland family, who we learned is a celestial dragon family with the introduction of Saint Figarland Garling earlier in this arc. Now, back during the post-Enies Lobby arc, Shanks offers Whitebeard some alcohol from his hometown in the West Blue, and if God Valley was on the Grand Line, this line wouldn't make much sense, so thankfully everything is in order with this clarification. But this brings up a whole lot of new questions, like how was Shanks able to acquire the alcohol if God Valley has been destroyed this whole time? That's something to worry about for a different video. Here, we see 6 treasure chests on the stage, perhaps presented as prizes for the awful competition the Celestial Dragons are about to take part in. And one of these chests could be the one that Shanks ends up in by the end of the incident. I've also seen some speculation that these chests hold devil fruits, perhaps one of them containing the mythical fish fruit that Big Mom gave Kaido after the God Valley incident itself. We'll just have to wait and see. We also get a better glimpse of God Valley, and it seems to resemble 2 hands coming together in prayer, perhaps even being inspired by the Praying Hands rock formation found in Arizona. And we learn that the Celestial Dragons hold this competition of exterminating an island's worth of people every 3 years. Perhaps this is a form of the Great Cleansing that the Elders referred to back during the Reverie arc. And the King of God Valley exclaims how ridiculous this is, only for him to be cut down by a young Figarland Garling. Now, with the context of this competition, it's now becoming a bit more clear what was meant by the statement of Garling having once distinguished himself at God Valley when he was first introduced earlier in the arc, as it seems that he may have been the winner of this manhunt. Garling here appears to be 38 years younger, of course, and lacks the beard that he would eventually grow out to form the moon-shaped head that we see in all of its glory in present day. And you have to admit, a young Garling does bear a somewhat striking resemblance to Shanks. Fans have speculated for a while now that Garling is Shanks' father, and at this point, it doesn't seem impossible. This also gives some extra weight to Whitebeard's comment to Shanks upon their meeting during the post-Enies Lobby arc. At the time, we had figured this to be in reference to either Blackbeard, who left the scar on Shanks, or perhaps even Roger, who Shanks sailed under in the past. However, with the context of the God Valley incidents, where a young Whitebeard would be involved under the Rock's pirates, it's not impossible that he's referring to how similar Shanks looks to Garling. There's some really interesting stuff going on here, and I can't wait to see it play out. We cut to the continuation of the scene that we first saw in Kuma's memories earlier on in this arc, with some other fellow slaves trying to bring a runaway Kuma back to the competition. Back then, we see his final words before getting knocked out, exclaiming that he'll just die anyway, so to kill him now. But he comes to when a voice calls out from the distance, saying that they choose to live, and we get a young Emporio Ivankov. Who would have expected them to be a slave alongside Kuma at the God Valley incident? Incredible twist here. Now, we had known Kuma and Ivankov were old friends, as suggested by Ivankov's reaction to seeing a pacifista during the Marineford War, but soon after, we would learn that they were both part of the Revolutionary Army, as we saw during the post-war arc. To think they went all the way back to childhood. And for the record, Kuma would be around 9 years old at this point, and Ivankov would be around 15. Now this may also beg the question, could a 17-year-old Monkey D. Dragon also somehow be involved in all of this, as the 3 of them were the founding members of the Revolutionary Army? It would make some sense after all. Luffy was 17 when his journey began, and maybe dragons did as well. We'll have to see. Oh, of course, we also get the introduction of a new character, Ginny. She refers to Ivankov as her brother, unsure if this is by blood or just by them being close friends, but just who is this character? Well, I personally believe she may be Kuma's eventual partner and Bonney's mother. In the original text, her name is written in the same pattern as Bonney's name, as well as Queen Connie's name with the katakana for ni elongated. Now, I've seen some people suggest that this is actually Luffy's mother, as Ginny is seen eating a piece of meat, a signature trademark of Luffy. But of course, Bonney was also introduced with a shank of meat as well, so I don't think there's much significance to that. All in all, I think we're in for a crazy flashback considering we're likely moments away from the God Valley incident. I doubt we'll get the event in full, seeing as how this is taking place from Kuma's perspective. Well, actually, it's Bonney remembering Kuma's memory, so it's even further displaced, but either way, this is going to be absolutely insane. Even after having been a fan of the series for nearly 2 decades and reading week to week most of that time, I think I can say with some confidence that the Egghead arc is quickly on track to become one of my favorite arcs of all time. Now, there is a break next week, but I can't wait to get back into this story. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you like my thoughts on the chapter and have been enjoying these videos over the past few months, I'd really appreciate it if you dropped a like and subscribed. It helps the channel grow, and we've got some really cool things coming down the line. As always, thank you once again for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next one.